Hello, welcome everybody. We're about to begin. There are plenty of seats at the front, and we urge you to sit in the front. We never call on people unexpectedly, so you can sit in the front, and it's okay. Let me call to the podium to welcome people our Dean and President, Anthony Crowell.
Thanks so much, Ross. Really appreciate that. And I want to welcome everyone to this tremendous City Law breakfast. I love having a packed house, and I can understand why. We have our public advocate here today, Letitia James, and I couldn't be more proud of that, to welcome her to New York's law school. And she and I have a long history. We worked together when I was in the Bloomberg administration and she was in the council. And we worked a lot on libraries, did a lot of good for Brooklyn, and she's a wonderful, wonderful leader, a wonderful champion for so much that is good about New York, and she is making New York stronger and better every day in her position as public advocate. And what I love about the Office of Public Advocate is that it has tremendous, tremendous range in terms of what someone in that office can do in terms of looking at modern day challenges and helping everyday citizens to overcome them and to help set the city on a better course. So we are very grateful for your work on a daily basis and for the impact that you've had, which is tremendous since you've taken office as public advocate and certainly in the council. So with that, let me invite Ross back up to give some more formal introductions. And it's always nice to have a fellow lawyer here to talk to our students and our guests because you are a role model and someone we can look to for guidance and leadership. So thank you so much for being here.
Well, I do want to welcome everybody here and welcome Letitia James. Her biography is really interesting. Born in Brooklyn, public schools, Fort Hamilton High School, Lehman College, Howard University School of Law. She, her legal career took her first to the Legal Aid Society and then active in politics, counseled with Albert Vann and Roger Green in the New York State Assembly. She became an assistant attorney general under the administration of Eliot Spitzer, then and continued actively in politics, ran and lost in November 2001 to James E. Davis for a city council position, and then Davis was shockingly assassinated at City Hall, an incredibly dramatic event that we remember with sadness. And then that was an open seat after that, and there was a very contested election, and Letitia James prevailed in that, became a leader in the council, chair of committees, active in particularly in investigative work, city time contract, worked on particularly housing issues as related to the Barclay Center, the evolving project there, and then ran for public advocate in 2013 when the public advocate Bill de Blasio vacated that position to run for mayor. She won in a very tough primary with a runoff and has since taken on the position and done a great job using both her legal skills and her political skills, known for using litigation as a technique to pursue important policy agendas. She's sued, had lawsuits involving education, police, foster care, finance, and in that position has done exactly what the public advocate should do. Those of you recall the debates in 1989 as to whether to retain the position. Recall that the negative side was that the public advocate had no executive authority or legislative authority to speak of. On the other hand, the public advocate was a counterweight to both the executive and legislative branch and was supposed to be that counterweight. And in addition, the position gave an opportunity to have a third citywide official who could rise to prominence and have opportunities to advance an important legal career. And we've seen in Bill de Blasio and now Letitia James that viewpoint was correct and that in both aspects. So we are delighted today at this 138th City Law Breakfast to bring to the podium Letitia James.
Thank you, Anthony, and thank you, Ross. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
So first, I need to recognize a young lady who worked on my campaign and is now a student here. She was a fierce campaigner. She was from the grassroots. She was someone on the campaign field no one really wanted to mess with. She organized everyone in the city of New York, and now she's a first-year law student and someone who worked in our office organizing individuals. Her name is Gina Bull. Gina, stand up. So if you ever want someone to work on your campaign, you need Gina. She's small and diminutive, but that belies. I've seen her in crowds just yell at people and organize people and tell everyone to get in line. And now she's a first-year law student. She's about to finish her first semester. We miss her so much in the Office of Public Advocate. And so, Gina, it's great to see you. So I really want to thank Dean Anthony Crowell, the Center for New York City Law Director, and Professor Ross Sandler, and the Associate Director, Brian Kazuba, for the invitation. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. I apologize if I did not. There is a feeling in this room. A number of you have approached me. We are gathered here, obviously, to engage and reflect as our nation sits on the cusp of change. And it's a significant moment in history, one that people will look back on in the years to come, a peaceful transfer of power. But across our country, across our city, there are dark clouds of suspicion and fear and intolerance have gathered. For many, the future seems bleak and hopeless. And I have never known fear like this. I saw fear in the eyes of a Muslim community yesterday in Queens, as they told me about a young lady who was on the bus in Queens wearing a hijab, and someone pulled off her hijab on the bus in Queens and said, Trump was elected and you have to go back to your country. The night before last, I was at the LGBT Center in Manhattan on West 13th Street. It was packed. And there were a number of members of the LGBT community who spoke, and they talked about their fears. I then went to a senior center in Brooklyn where I spoke to an audience, primarily African-American seniors, mostly women, who were afraid about rolling back the clock, all the progress that we have made as a nation. They saw on New York One a sign that was shown on New York One where someone, I think, had written on a bridge that America is white again. There's been swastikas in Brooklyn, swastikas in Manhattan, swastikas in Queens. There's a lot of fear, my friends. But I'm here to remind you that when the sky is the darkest, that's when the stars shine the brightest. And so now is the time for all of us attorneys and lawyers and attorney wannabes to shine as we defend the principles of justice and equality, liberty and inclusion. Now, I think we also may have some opportunities working with President-elect Trump. I think there's an opportunity to provide jobs for individuals. I look forward to working with him on an infrastructure bill, look forward to working with him on child care, look forward to working with him on economic development. Hopefully he can recognize that we've got an affordable housing crisis in the city of New York and provide more resources. Hopefully he won't disband HUD, and we can focus on building more affordable housing and addressing the homeless crisis that we have in our city of New York. But I will disagree with him vehemently, and I know Gina and I will be on the front lines of the protest when he attempts to step on the rights of individuals, particularly in the vulnerable communities anywhere in this city. And so many people have asked, where do we go from here? And my answer is forward and upward always. And justice doesn't take a holiday or a break when things get rough. And we have to fight twice as hard through the setbacks, knowing, in the words of Dr. King, that the arc of the moral universe bends towards justice. And that I might also add that the path towards progress is never straight. It's never straight. It's filled with twists and turns. and sometimes can be very tortuous, but ultimately we get to justice. So now is the time to fight hardest for our principle. Now is the time to organize and to mobilize and to inspire individuals and to lift them up. And now is the time of people of like mind. We need to come together and protect the most vulnerable in our city and in our country. We've got a powerful legacy of being that moral arc right here in New York. And we're not going to allow anyone to dampen that light. And as a New Yorker, and as so many of you in here, we are committed to social justice because this is the city. This city is at the vanguard of social justice. And so everything I believe, as someone who is a relentless optimist, someone who wakes up every day drunk on hope, we're going to be all right. We will be all right. Thank you. So what's a public advocate? Right? Like, we didn't even know, some people, I didn't even know what a public advocate is. I never heard of a public advocate. When did you come into being? When did the office come into being? What's it all about? What's your role? What's your function? Are you paid? Do you work for Mayor de Blasio? This is what I hear all the time. Oftentimes they confuse me for being Charlene, but anyway, that's another point. That's something entirely different. And I just say, no, she's shorter. So anyway. Thank you, Michael. So the Office of Public Advocate is second in line to the Mayor of the City of New York, the Office of Public Advocate. Our role is primarily to introduce legislation to provide oversight over the mayor and various city agencies. We serve on the NYSERS board and a number of other boards. I preside over the City Council. If ever you cannot sleep at night and you don't want to take a warm glass of milk, just turn on the City Channel and you will see the City Council at our stated meetings, and you will see me preside in this chair with a Texas banner, and that'll put you to sleep, I guarantee you. One of the different ways that I have been using the Office of Public Advocate is, one, to make the office more visible, two, to make the office more relevant, and three, to use the law as a tool, primarily to take the city and its agencies to task to ensure that they provide services to the City of New York. We have initiated 11, I believe the last count was 11 lawsuits against the mayor of the City of New York. And yes, he's my ally, but I do enjoy suing him from time to time. So we've sued him, I think, 11, right, team? It's 11. I think it's 11, right? It's about 11 cases. One of the most recent cases, the last 3 that we've been successful on, was a case involving disabled children on hot buses. During the summer months, children who were disabled, most of them who were not verbal, autistic, are being transported on hot buses, and unfortunately the law says that, you know, they're required to have air conditioning, and a number of the buses were not, most of the buses were not air conditioned. And so we sued on behalf of the disabled community because their parents contacted me, because children were getting off of buses, the temperature was exceeding 100 degrees, children who were nonverbal, who were hitting their heads against the wall of the bus because of the temperature on the bus. We sued, we were successful in that particular case, and now we're working with the administration to get air conditioning for these disabled children too. There was a system in place called CSIS, basically to track disabled children in the City of New York, to track to see if they were getting the services that they need, their IEPs, their individual educational plans. And unfortunately, CSIS, we argued, was totally ineffective and was not tracking the disabled community. We sued the Department of Education on behalf of these children, and we were successful in the administration reforming CSIS. And lastly, a case most recently we were successful on was the student leadership teams, which were not accessible to the public. We believe that government should be transparent, and that school leadership teams at all of the schools should be open to parents and to the general public, and we were successful in that case as well. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about how we are using the law to make New York a little bit more equitable for everyone. The first instance is immigration. New York City is a city built on the blood, sweat, and tears of American immigrants. and we have always been a port in the storm, a place that welcomed those brave enough to start their lives anew with open arms. And that is our legacy, and we must embrace it now more than ever. Today, more than 500,000 undocumented New Yorkers live under the radar. They live in the shadows. And I've always been committed to helping undocumented New Yorkers get the services and the resources they need. And when there was a mass of unaccompanied minors from Central America crossing the border in 2014 to escape dangerous, life-threatening circumstances back home, I worked with a number of legal service providers, some who are in this room, to ensure that these young people received the representation they deserved. And the need for legal representation was so high that I personally took on a case myself. At 15 years old, Kebby Garcia was forced to flee Honduras. His father died of cancer, and his relatives could not care for him. The gangs in his hometown had threatened his life. Speaking no English, he traveled over 3,500 miles to join his cousin in Brooklyn. Like millions before him, Kebby came here for an opportunity for a better life. And during our time in and out of immigration court, Kebby's biggest priority was simply getting the legal ability to work and get ahead. Today, Kebby is going to high school, learning English. He even interned in my office. He has not one girlfriend, but two. But what's most importantly is that he was approved for a green card. And so we will now have every opportunity, He has two girlfriends, but I mean, he also is an A student. Not that warrants him for having two girlfriends, and I continue to have discussions with him. But he will now have an opportunity to succeed and fulfill the American dream. And my goal is to ensure that every undocumented immigrant in our city gets a shot at it. In fact, the lawyers in my office have committed to taking on cases pro bono as immigrants are rushing to file papers before the new administration takes hold. And I urge all of you to join our office. We have a number of volunteer attorneys who assist all of these immigrants who've been contacting our office to get their papers filed, particularly given the new administration, because we cannot turn our backs on the citizens of tomorrow, and we can't lift the ladder up behind them. We must help those in need, and especially our children. On the issue of foster care, our foster care children are one of the most vulnerable populations in the city. And New York City currently has 9,000 children and youth in foster care. And too many of these children are suffering physically, emotionally, psychologically, and some, yes, are being sexually abused because the system is failing them. And children in New York City are living in some of these deplorable conditions. They spend over twice as long in foster care as children in the rest of the country. And New York State, unfortunately, ranks as one of the lowest states in terms of adoptions. And so we wanted to look at the issue of foster care, and particularly the Administration for Children's Services. So in the summer of 2015, along with 19 foster care children, we filed a class action lawsuit against ACS and the State Office for Children and Family Services for causing irreparable harm to children in New York City foster care. ACS had delegated foster care to 29 contract agencies. The way these contracts are written, these agencies were required to comply with all applicable ACS policies, state and federal law. And we believe that a huge part of the problem was that ACS was failing to carefully monitor these contract agencies. And children like Elisa, she was one of our co-plaintiffs. She paid the price. Elisa was 17 years old at the time of our lawsuit and had been in ACS custody for 13 years. She was removed from the care of her mother when she was 4. And at the time of her removal, her biological mother was 19 years old, and she was also living in foster care. And she was removed because of allegations of physical abuse. Elisa had been in too many foster placements to count and had attended at least 8 schools. She reported a serious history of physical, emotional, and sexual abuse at multiple foster homes, including being forced to sleep in a bug-infested bedroom, being sexually abused by the neighbor of a foster parent, and being denied food. As a result of Lisa's time in care, she suffered from a variety of mental health problems and has been diagnosed with depression and bipolar disorder and PTSD. She was self-hospitalized for 2 months, and following that was so heavily medicated that she could barely speak. Despite having an aunt willing to adopt her and her biological mother wanting custody again, ACS had taken no steps to find her a permanent home. And Elisa represents a tragic example of ACS's failing the children that it's supposed to serve. The agency's systematic failures also extend to youth who are transitioning out of care. Each year, nearly 1,000 young people age out of foster care, only to enter back into the city services because they weren't given the tools to make it. In fact, when they transition out, they basically get a Metro card, and that's about it. And being a child in foster care should not mean homelessness, dependence on welfare, or prison in adulthood, and yet far too often it is. After passing through the foster system, which is already a significant life challenge, these young adults are required to manage their housing, their employment, their education, and health on their own with little guidance and no safety net. And as you might imagine, the outcome of these circumstances is often tragic. About 1/4 of foster youth who age out of the system are in homeless shelters. They're on our streets. They sleep on subway grates. Yet the city has only set aside about 100 apartments for youth who age out. It's evident that more needs to be done. And recently I sponsored a bill into law by Mayor de Blasio that tracks these young adults after they leave the system to better understand what support and resources they are leveraging and the problems that they have encountered with homelessness or law enforcement. And the bill requires that they share the information with relevant agencies in hopes of facilitating long-term solutions. And it is not just our foster children who need our help. We're all shaken by the tragic death of Zamir Perkins earlier this fall. Zamir's death is unfortunately all too common. Zamir was a child with substantiated cases of physical abuse and neglect, and he was not registered for school this year. And there were red flags that should have resulted in immediate action by ACS. But unfortunately, we all know what happened. And this mismanagement has cost hundreds of innocent children their lives. And I pray for Zamir, but it shouldn't have to take a child's death to get ACS to reform the system. But it's unfortunate that as a result of Zamir's death, ACS is now working with us to reform the system. And I would hope that all of you would join with us to work with ACS so that we can prevent another unfortunate death. Housing. As a public advocate, I'm working to ensure that all New Yorkers have a decent place to live. Every New Yorker deserves to live in safety and security, and every apartment needs to meet basic standards of decency. But the unfortunate reality is that too many New Yorkers are living in buildings run by horrible landlords. And each year, we publish the worst landlords list. In fact, landlords wait in anticipation as to whether or not they're going to be on the list. I get a flurry of calls before I publish the worst landlords list. And it's basically to put unscrupulous landlords on notice and to give tenants a powerful tool to organize. Because, quite frankly, shame works. Shame works. And a number of landlords contact me, again, because they do not want to be on the list. And for the most egregious cases, we've gone even further. We have evoked a state law to protect nearly 2,000 tenants in 12 buildings owned by 7 landlords. I want to thank, where's Jennifer Levy, who is the lead counsel for the Office of Public Advocate. Jennifer, stand up. Yeah. Jennifer is the brains behind most of the litigation we file in the office, and so she identified a unknown law called Spiegel's Law. And basically, we urged the mayor of the city of New York to withhold public assistance rent payments to some of the city's worst landlords until they repaired their dilapidated buildings. The mayor agreed, and we have withheld these payments from a number of landlords because the conditions were deplorable. Crumbling stairwells, leaking pipes, lead paint, vermin, rodents, and collectively the buildings had over 2,000 violations. And as a result of our efforts, all of the landlords settled with the city and they agreed to make payments. because decent housing is essential, and for thousands of New Yorkers ensnared in the criminal justice system, so are reforms to remedy our often flawed legal process. I want to tell you about one tenant in particular who lived in the Bronx, and we visited her right after we released our worst landlords list. She was a humble woman, 70 some odd years, but very, very spry and very young. And her landlord had removed her kitchen and had removed her bathroom, and she lived in her bedroom. And in order to go to the bathroom, the landlord graciously gave her a key to a bathroom on the first floor. She lived on the third, and she had to go to use the bathroom on the first floor. When I visited her apartment, there was dust everywhere, all over the place. And she apologized, and I said, "You don't have to apologize." And she wiped away the dust from the couch so that I could sit. And I said, "There's no need for that, I'm used to dust." And she just said, "I apologize, I don't normally live like this, but my landlord comes in here when I'm oftentimes and just renovates, and the ceiling is falling down, and there's just dust everywhere, and I need help." Well, I'm happy to say that our team was able to get her a new apartment, brand new apartment, paying less rent, with a new kitchen, a new bathroom, and a beautiful bedroom right near her home in the Bronx. And I'm happy to say that that landlord is currently being investigated by the District Attorney of the Borough of the Bronx. And, in other cases in Brooklyn, we were able to get landlords arrested for basically doing the same thing. And so basically, we put a notice out there to any landlords who would want to take advantage of the current political system or the political environment, and who would want to take advantage of immigrants in the city of New York, that it will not be tolerated. Criminal justice. Reform starts with addressing the troubling incidents of police misconduct. And over the past year, all of us, we've watched with fear and revulsion the videos capturing the deaths of Eric Garner, Tamir Rice, Philando Castile, Alfred Orlongo, and others. And we have demanded answers about Sandra Bland and Freddie Gray, who both died tragically while in police custody. And it's unfortunate, but we are reaching a critical mass in recorded instances of police misconduct. It's also very unfortunate and very sad that 5 Dallas police officers were gunned down. 3 Baton Rouge police officers were gunned down. And in our own beloved New York City, 4 officers lost their life last year. And many of these officers, some were killed in the name of revenge, a sick cycle of hate and violence. And there has been a growing sentiment that if you support law enforcement, you don't support communities of color, or vice versa. But I have argued, and I believe, that supporting the police, as I do, and demanding civil rights are not at all contradictory ideas, and that we need to work side by side. Police protecting us from discrimination and advocates holding police accountable, that is the recipe for safe and just communities. And there is an urgent need for police and criminal justice reform, transparency, and accountability measures, which is why we were in the forefront of urging the administration to provide body cameras for members of NYPD. And in addition to that, urging NYPD that they train officers in engaging in non-lethal uses of force, that we continue to improve police-community relations, and that we engage in more innovative technology in police departments across the country. We were involved in urging the former Police Commissioner Bratton, and then Kelly and now O'Neill. They have adopted ShotSpotter, which is a system which has now been installed all throughout the city of New York, which can identify where gunshots are in the city of New York. I believe in technology, and I recognize that it will go a long way in reforming the system. And it's not just the policing process that needs reform, because after being arrested, indigent defendants face more challenging hurdles in a system that punishes people for being poor before they've even been convicted of a crime. And according to the Brooklyn Defenders, fare evasion, jumping a turnstile, which is, I would argue, a crime of poverty, was the top category of arrest in 2015. Jumping the turnstile, the number one crime committed in our city. And low-income individuals need income supports, I would argue, and not Rikers Island. Individuals like Khalif Browder, who was unlawfully detained when he was 16 years old at Rikers Island for 3 years. Khalif was thrown in jail on unsubstantiated charges that were ultimately dropped, yet he was kept in solitary confinement for over 400 days. And even after his exoneration, Khalif couldn't shake the trauma of his inhumane treatment at Rikers, and tragically he took his own life at 22. And his heartbreaking story is a lesson to all of us on the psychological impact of incarceration, and particularly without due process. Khalif died because he and his family couldn't afford to bail him out. And his mother most recently died, and some argue she died because of a broken heart. Bail wasn't designed to be a punitive measure. It is simply to ensure that the defendants will appear for trial and for all the trial hearings. Bail is not preventative detention, and our criminal justice system has created a perverse economic incentive, feeding off the misery of men and women who mainly live in 7 zip codes in our city. And our exploding jail and prison population, incarceration has increased 500% in the last 40 years because decades of imbalance has rigged our system of justice. It is because of unconscious bias. It is because our bail system penalizes poor people. It is because the criminal justice system serves as an unsuspecting mousetrap for far too many New Yorkers. Homeless, mentally ill individuals who should be housed and are getting treatment and care instead of incarceration. It is because we do not have an effective diversion program redirecting non-violent, low-risk defendants to services. And too many Americans of color cycle through the criminal justice system, and too many lives are forever impacted and entangled by the ordeal. Of the nearly 10,000 people detained in our city jails pre-trial, more than 50% for whom bail are set are there simply because they cannot afford a low bail of $3,000 or less. And too often these clients are forced to plead guilty to avoid a costly trial. And meanwhile, the city's annual per inmate last year was $167,000. I believe that is more than the cost of tuition here. I think so. Yeah, he believes so. Okay, thank you, Dean. And over 40% of the current New York City inmate population suffers from some form of mental illness. After years of being ignored, the country has finally turned its attention to reforming our system. And here in New York City, we have an administration that is taking important steps, including with the City Council, towards testing a bail alternative program for certain low-risk defendants. But we must do more. We must create multi-pronged solutions that include treatment for those suffering from mental illness and substance abuse, alternatives to incarceration, decriminalization of low-level offenses, and investment in youth development, particularly in underserved communities. We must also make it easier for those exiting the criminal justice system to re-enter. Last year, we banned the box so that employees can no longer ask about criminal records. And these are the types of reforms that are necessary to ensure that our city's rate of recidivism drops dramatically. And my office is also committed to criminal justice reform. And we all know that we sadly lost an ally. My friend, my neighbor, and my ally, Brooklyn District Attorney Ken Thompson. Ken Thompson was the first man of color elected to head the Brooklyn DA's office. He worked as a reformer, and his life, unfortunately, and his work and his life was cut tragically short, but not before he could leave a legacy of pursuing justice for the borough's most vulnerable. Creating a criminal justice system that is accountable and transparent is the new civil rights movement, and Ken was on the front line. He had revitalized the Criminal Review Unit, which revisits questionable convictions and works to get innocent people out of jail. His efforts led to the exoneration of 21 wrongly convicted individuals. And if you add up all of the time these individuals spent in jail, it totals 400 years. And though Ken is no longer with us, his inspiring brand of restorative justice is being continued by the current acting Brooklyn DA, Eric Gonzalez. And I look forward to working closely with District Attorney Gonzalez to help build a truly equitable justice system for those in Brooklyn and throughout the 5 boroughs. And I'm particularly focused on the mental health part, and I'm particularly focused on sex trafficking in the borough of Brooklyn. And in fact, there is a documentary that is out about sex trafficking in Brooklyn, which has received a number of awards, and I am highlighted in that documentary. The fight for social justice is not always easy, and using the law as a tool for change is not the path of least resistance. And there will be challenges, and there will be setbacks, and there will be bumps in the road. But there will be victories, and those victories will have a lasting effect on countless lives. And so we must continue to look to all of those who challenge the establishment, all of those attorneys and justices who were at the forefront of social justice, individuals like my personal hero, Thurgood Marshall, and Jack Greenberg, as well as Sonia Sotomayor. She was another history maker. And so we need more lawyers like Sonia Sotomayor, Thurgood Marshall, Jack Greenberg, and of course my Shiro, because I was with her, Hillary Clinton, to be change agents at the highest level of our government. Their journeys and struggles remind those of us on the right side of history that the arc of the moral universe will always bend towards justice. We can and we must all ensure that our nation remains the greatest country on earth. And the more people that talk about fairness and inclusion and effectively work to make America a country that offers liberty and justice for all, the faster things will change. And all of us during these dark days must stand together and be allies together and fight together and work together and continue to make sure that New York City and this country remains that shining light on a hill. Thank you so much.
That was really wonderful, and it demonstrates the importance of the public advocate, the range of things that were mentioned, and the power of that office, extraordinary, and your use of it is extraordinary. We have microphones, and we welcome comments and questions, not too long, hopefully, so that we get others to speak. But before we begin, I just want to thank the sponsors of these breakfasts. We are delighted. This is the 138th breakfast, and our sponsors, Greenberg Traurig, the law firm of Greenberg Traurig, has been with us from the beginning. Con Edison and Verizon all have been wonderful in supporting these breakfasts. Also, the Gold Star attendees, you have a gold star on your, that means that you contributed to the breakfast, and we welcome that. And of course, in this time of the year, we welcome contributions. I also want to thank the people who work so hard at the center, Brian Kasuba, mentioned earlier, Lillian Valle Santiago, Jonathan Sizemore, Jesse Deno, who put so much into this, and also the staff of New York Law School. We could not have this beautiful facility and the opportunity to present these wonderful breakfasts without all that help. Now, let's begin with questions or comments. And pardon?
Yeah, I think I was the first to stand to ask a question.
Michael was the first.
Public advocate.
Yes, Michael.
Yeah.
All right. Well, would you please state your name? Thank you.
My name is Michael Myers. I'm the president and the executive director of the New York Civil Rights Coalition.
Yes.
My question addresses your initial comments about fear.
Yeah,
Fear.
yeah,
It was President Franklin Roosevelt who said, all there is to fear is fear itself.
yes,
It was President Obama who said elections have consequences.
Yes.
No one imagined that the consequences of an election in democracy
yeah.
would mean, contemplate, or signify violence in the streets against minorities or against the supporters of the victor in the presidential race.
I agree.
So will you, different from President Obama, condemn all acts of violence?
I condemn all acts of
hate and
violence,
hatred?
Michael Myers.
And since you're in a law, I want you to be more specific.
I
Now,
support the right to protest.
yeah, of course.
But I condemn
talking
all
violence
acts of
and
violence.
mayhem. That's what I'm talking about.
Right.
Now, with respect to you're in a
And
law
if you don't
school.
finish your question,
You're in
Ross
a-
may
you're in a- you're in a-
engage in an act
yeah,
of.
You're in a law. I'm ready for it. Right.
You're rolling, but you got to stop.
And you're in a law school. What is the role of the rule of law, particular respect to protecting the rights of minorities in terms of stare decisis and precedent, and how does that fly in the face of so-called sanctuary cities? Aren't you defying the law?
So let me just tell you, when I was in Queens, as I mentioned, when someone pulled off a hijab off of a woman's head on a bus, That's an act of defiance and an act of hate. And working with NYPD, hopefully the individuals who were responsible for that crime will be arrested. When individuals scratch swastikas in parts of Borough Park and Crown Heights and in parts of Manhattan, as well as in Forest Hills, that's an act of hate. And in that particular case, we should rise up and those individuals should be apprehended. It's those types of incidents that I have no tolerance for anyone who engages in hate and acts of hate. Sure, you can support whoever you want to support, and I can support whoever I want to support. But when I draw a line against physical acts of hate that are intended to intimidate individuals.
Good morning, Howard Euro. Any thoughts on the upcoming mayoral campaign?
It's going fine. I'm not the mayor. The Office of Public Advocate, we're also up for re-election. And so we'll be launching our re-election very soon.
Maria Roca, Friends of Sunset Park.
Yay, for Sunset Park.
This week, sadly, a decision was made locally, and I hope it doesn't progress further, to sell the public land under our public library to a private not-for-profit, though for what appears to be a noble purpose when you first see it. However, my question is to the disposition, AKA sale, of public assets, which I will go to my grave or the crematorium with the idea that public assets are there for public benefit.
I agree.
And different people have different ideas of what public benefit is. What do you feel, or what do you think, or how do you think should happen with the sale, particularly, of libraries?
Yes.
To other than educational purposes, at a time when our schools are seriously, seriously overcrowded, as they are in Sunset Park. 8 of our 10 schools are at more than 160% of capacity.
So as you know, as a former city council member representing Fort Greene, Clinton Hill, Prospect Heights, Crown Heights, shout out, I was very involved and concerned about the sale of public assets. As you know, I stopped the sale of Children's Library on Pacific Street as a result of a real estate deal. I was able to save that library. And as most of you, and as you know, I expressed concerns with regards to the sale of the Brooklyn Heights Library. And so I'm very much concerned about the public assets, particularly given if there is no public benefit, and given the fact that there is a crisis in affordable housing, and a problem with individuals who are suffering from mental illness who are on our streets, and all of us should be concerned about that. What we should be doing is focusing on those public benefits as opposed to selling a public asset to a developer for the purposes of making money.
May I have?
Could you tell us just what the sale is?
So what was this? Could you just talk a little bit about the sale of the
sale
Sunset?
is the
And who did they sell it
for
to?
$1 to the Fifth Avenue Committee, which does have a good record, and there's nothing personal about this, and to build a 2.5, what will become a 1.5 above ground a new library. After our beautiful Carnegie Library was demolished in the 1970s because of lack of the maintenance of the asset. And so we're told now that we need a new library because this asset has also not been maintained, because this needs to be part of the conversation, to build then above that library and cap that library from expansion forever, 49 units of low-income housing, and it is low-income housing in perpetuity. However, after one does the calculations of eligibility, so forth and so on, if 5 of the 49 apartments, and we're not sure if it's going to be 49, that's what's being proposed, if 5 of those units end up being for Sunset Park, because set-asides and whatnot are community board-wide, they're not for neighborhoods, which is now in the courts as such, and that is basically the deal. But then the
just
Fifth
stop.
Avenue Committee
Let
will
me just stop
return the library for $1 as a condo.
That was a helpful explanation because many of us didn't know what exactly you were speaking about, and I thank you for that. But let's go to the next slide.
Okay. Good morning. My name's Belina Anderson, and I've worked for the City of New York previously, and I do so now. So I want to preface by saying my comments and questions are in my individual capacity. My thanks to Jennifer Levy. I made a cold call to your office, and your legal staff gave me an audience about issues on affordable housing. And I wanted to ask you what how it came to you to use litigation more robustly in trying to advance policy, and in particular, what you might do about subsidies to developers who create a term that I want to have gain currency, which is lemon housing, receiving subsidies, building housing that is not, that has construction defects,
Right.
and then HPD not taking a look back to make sure that the developers have fulfilled their commitments to the communities by building housing that
Substandard
can,
housing.
exactly, and
Yeah.
then the people who are sought to be benefited,
Right.
that constituency actually are saddled with assessments that go on into the future.
Yeah. First of all, let me just recognize, could you stand up all the members of the Public Advocates Legal Team? They came for the breakfast. We don't pay much. So we have been working with some homeowners in Brooklyn who in fact were able to get these homes through a lottery through HPD. And most of these homes are located in Bedford, Stuyvesant, and Brownsville. They are substandard. There are construction flaws. And our office has been reviewing that to determine what legal recourse, if any, we have, and/or perhaps negotiating with the administration to reduce the costs associated with bringing these buildings up to a state of habitability and correcting all of the construction flaws. They were built by a number of not-for-profits. Most of these not-for-profits are no longer in existence, and and unfortunately, the homeowners have been saddled with the costs. And so their home was supposed to be their dream. Unfortunately, it's become their nightmare. And so we, again, are looking at that, and we would love to continue to work with you. And if you have a particular case, we would be more than happy to examine it and perhaps include it in our possible class action.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Tish.
Hi.
Ethan Binder here, first-year law student at New York Law School. I've been following your office since you got elected in 2013. I was on Thompson's campaign at that point. Do you have any advice for students who want to kind of transition to a similar role that you're doing? I know you spoke about having a legal team, but do you have any advice for, students?
That's a great question. So when I was campaigning, I had promised individuals that I would explore and expand. I wanted to take the Office of Public Advocate in a different direction. And though the charter specifically says we have the right to sue in certain instances, I really wanted to push the envelope on that, and that's what we have been doing. And I also, in the next term, if the voters reelect me, I really want to look at forensic investigators and look more deeply into city agencies and some programs which I believe have not been effective and would reduce costs for taxpayers, such as what we did when I was a city council member in uncovering city time. So for law students and attorneys who basically want another profession, well, not another profession, but perhaps want to look at government, I think there's a number of attorneys in various city agencies and the Office of Public Advocate, I obviously hire attorneys. City Council has a number of attorneys drafting legislation and reviewing laws. There's a number of agencies that hire attorneys. I think at some point in time, and I was speaking to staff, I would like to meet with law students, senior law students all throughout the city of New York, and explore and inform and educate them about the opportunities that currently exist in the city of New York, in city government. I think it's time that we take a fresh start and a fresh look at some of the young attorneys who are graduating, individuals who basically want to change the world and champion the good fight. That's something that we are looking at and perhaps organizing. And so hopefully you can work with our office and if the Office of Public Advocate, I've argued, should really be independent. Our budget of the Office of Public Advocate should be tied to the city budget. We should get a percentage as opposed to being dependent upon the mayor of the city of New York and the city council to negotiate our budget. You know, if they like me, they'll expand my budget. If they don't like me, as in the past, well, not me, but other public advocates, they've decreased their budget. When Mayor Bloomberg decreased the budget of Mayor de Blasio, I don't believe that that was fair. And one of the things that we would like to look at is perhaps making sure that the Office of Public Advocate remains independent as is IBO. And IBO became independent as a result of litigation and negotiation. And that's something also on our agenda. So we look forward to working with you. You can speak to a member of our legal term, but we believe, and I believe, that the Office of Public Advocate should be independent and should not be dependent upon the mayor of the city of New York or whether or not you're in good standing with the mayor or the speaker of the city council.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Brian Kerr. I'm a student at Fordham University, and I'm actually doing a research paper on the position of public advocate. So I wanted to know, what do you say to people who think the position of public advocate should be eliminated?
They're not saying that now. They're not. It's just not happening. Well, I think what you should do is outline all of the work of the Office of Public Advocate. And I just want you to know that as a result of the work that we have been doing, I've been invited to, I believe it was San Francisco or some other jurisdiction where they're thinking about creating the Office of Public Advocate. I believe it's California. And again, you need an independent voice to speak truth to power. You need an independent office to make sure that city agencies are doing their job and not just responding to complaints. We have a wonderful complaint a constituent office where we have caseworkers and social workers responding to complaints from constituents all throughout the city of New York. I'm happy to report we have resolved over 10,000 complaints in the city of New York through our caseworkers and through our volunteers and social workers. But the office really should be independent. You have the ability to introduce legislation. You serve on boards. And you have the ability, again, to use the law as a tool to correct injustices. And last but not least, there should be investigators in the Office of Public Advocate to do forensic investigations of city agencies and their budgets. Unlike the controller who does financial audits, I want to do a forensic audit of city agencies and budgets. And so we are really, again, pressing the envelope on the Office of Public Advocate and establishing precedent in the law so that the Office of Public Advocate could be made more effective. And I have not heard anyone in my travels in all 5 boroughs say the office should be disbanded. If you have heard them, I want their name and number.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Let me just say, because of the time, the people standing will be the last to ask questions.
Joel Kupferman, New York Environmental Law and Justice
Hey,
Project.
how are you?
Okay, I commend your actions on the individual cases in terms of improving people's living conditions. That's bad. But they're little battles in the war, and I think part of the problem has been the unfettered construction that New York City has been going through. I got a call yesterday from parents at a school that there's asbestos and lead there, but it's also coming from dust from the construction that's coming in. Another case where someone's back being hospitalized because the builder was allowed to use a leaf blower to blow dust into a senior citizen home, another home.
Yeah.
And part of the problem is lack of fines. In 2014, the ECB had 531,000 violations issued. The city is owed $400 million in uncollected fines, DEP and the health department. That's one of the problems. The second problem is City Council continues to approve all this construction that's going on without a hard look. And I think it's up to you, I think you have the ability to push City Council to approve what's going on. And just one more, okay. But I think it's important that we talk about the little things, but the city is allowing this construction to go on. In 1998, there was over 1,000 deaths in Chicago from the heat wave. We know that when we do buildings, it creates heat to the other buildings that, that are around, and I'm concerned that we're allowing this, to happen. And so I'm asking in some ways, what role could your office play in making city council look at each of these construction?
So let's do this. Maybe you could speak to Larry Schimmel, and we could have a further discussion. I don't want to,
No, I understand. But
yeah.
I just want to say it's
Yeah.
important that we look at the wholesale
understand.
building, okay?
There's
And
a lot of construction going on, and we would like to look at the impacts.
right, and I think it's incumbent upon the health department and other agencies to really examine, and people are not, they're not enforcing those laws. Thank you.
That was a period.
Good morning. My name is Peter Belmont
How are
from
you?
Brooklyn. The things that you spoke about this morning have been about the immediate and urgent problems of people, lives in being, we might say. I'm wondering whether anybody in the city, including yourself, has a concern for global warming, which has, to my thinking, two aspects, one of which is trying to prevent global warming from being, and climate change from being worse than they will otherwise be, so that, for example, the city could try to get all of its electricity that it buys from green sources as a means of encouraging the state and the federal and everybody else to do the same, and encouraging people who sell green power to, to be able to make investments to do it. But on the other hand, there are also all the problems that have to do with trying to make the city protected from, well, for example, rising water levels and other problems which will someday in the future arise. So I'm just wondering whether global warming in either of those two aspects is part of your concerns.
So one of another function of the Office of Public Advocate is we have the ability to introduce legislation. And so we have introduced legislation. In fact, 4 bills that we have introduced have all passed in the city, more bills than any previous public advocate of the city of New York. We are looking at global warming. We are looking at infrastructure. We are looking at our environment, and particularly as it relates to asthma and its effect on children. We are working with the administration and the previous administration. I was a supporter of bike lanes and providing more subsidies to mass transit, reducing making sure that the environmental laws are followed. I was particularly concerned about air quality in parts of Brooklyn, where air quality continues to raise issues for those who have all types of health challenges. So to answer your question, yes, we are looking at global warming, and we're doing it through our policy and our legislative branch in the Office of Public Advocate. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kenzie Berry from Con Edison, so I appreciate your response to that last question. I agree, it's a very complex but important issue. My question relates to your first comments about the atmosphere of fear that's developed recently.
Yeah.
I believe also that there is a surgence of desire to engage, and was hoping you could comment on how we can encourage and really seize upon this from your office all the way down to community boards, which I feel like a lot of people right now are doing research on for the first time, and how can we encourage that all the way from your office down to block associations and those community boards?
It seems like we need more classes in civics, more classes in community boards, precinct councils, block associations, SLTs, and the list goes on and on and on, particularly now that people are yearning to get involved and to be active, partly to deal with the despair and the sense of disappointment all throughout the city of New York that I'm seeing, some parts, not all. And so we are having a rally on Sunday in Queens at Diversity Plaza in Jackson Heights, where we're bringing together a number of civic organizations to talk about just that and how individuals can connect and volunteer and work for some of these civic organizations to protect vulnerable populations and to continue to do good work such as address global warming affecting our environment, making sure that the administration continues to follow the law and all of the policy prescriptions that have been put out, they comply with, particularly EPA, and the list goes on and on and on. So hopefully you will join me, and obviously there's a number of women organizations that will be attending the event on Sunday. We obviously are concerned about the threat to women, in particular, reproductive rights, et cetera.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. My
Morning.
name is Aura Espinosa Deer. I'm actually working for a social service agency, a pretty large one in Brooklyn, and I'm an attorney wannabe right now. But my question is, being in social services, you're on the front lines and you see everything that you just talked about in very large numbers, and it can be very hopeless, you know, for you as you're engaging. And one thing that my coworkers and I talk about often is a galvanization of social workers to engage the law and really advocate on behalf of our clients. And I'm wondering if the Public Advocate's Office has heard of anything like that, or is there an initiative like that, and how could we get connected to it?
So I speak often to the Association of Social Workers. We have a number of social workers on staff. And perhaps what we can do is bring in the Association of Social Workers, which their office is in downtown Manhattan, as well as with attorneys to discuss how we can work collaboratively on addressing issues of social justice in the city of New York and making sure that the needs of vulnerable populations are met. So I would be more than happy to work with you on that. Lastly, let me close by saying this. We were very disappointed in the election, but I think, you know, the Democratic Party, all of us really need to speak to the economic anxiety that so many New Yorkers and the country is feeling. You know, as someone whose parents hail from the South, we really need to get back those Reagan Democrats, Obama Democrats, however you want to describe them, and really speak to the economic anxiety that people are suffering. I've been to the Rust Belt. I've been to the South. There's no more manufacturing. There's no more industrial industries that currently exist. We need to speak their language. We need to talk to them. We should not take them for granted, and we should continue to bring the rural South, the Midwest, and urban centers together and take back the Democratic Party. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much. This has been really a stimulating breakfast, and it is amazing the areas that you work in. And I thank you for that and for coming here this morning. I thank all of you for coming so early and hearing this really important talk. I also want to thank Public Advocate James for, she's agreed to stay a little while to meet with students, the students who are going to meet with her. It's in the boardroom, and we go right there, and that's really very nice of you to do that and important for us in the law school. We also, as we always like to do, we like to give some memento of the occasion to the speaker, and today it's a new book by my colleague James Zirin, who's on the board of New York Law School, called Supremely Partisan, about the U.S. Supreme Court. We give it to you with thanks for a stimulating and important morning with the Public Advocate. Thank you so much. Our next breakfast will be December 6th, in December with Steve Banks to talk about homelessness at Christmas time.